Ok, je commence encore. Ça fait un plaisir de présenter notre collègue et notre ancien ami Bertrand Hénard du CEA qui va nous parler des... Bon, le titre est là, je n'ai pas besoin de l'énoncer ni de présenter le bio de Bertrand parce que je pense que tout le monde le connaît et nous sommes très contents de l'avoir parmi nous aujourd'hui. Bertrand.
Okay, thank you, John. Well, in fact, you did your introduction in French. I think I should continue in English, or I don't know.
As you wish.
Okay. I mean, does everyone speak French here? Okay, I'm not sure. So I will continue. So I don't know. So if everyone speaks French, I can continue in French. But if
not everyone speaks in French, Bertrand.
Yeah. So okay. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. I know CRM well. I've spent a lot of time in CRM. I enjoy being at CRM, and I would like to come back to CRM. Well, the pandemic makes it difficult at present, but I hope to be able to come back as soon as possible. I also need to thank my institute, the IPHC, which is in the CEA, and I need to thank my grant, European grant. Okay. What I'm going to talk about is how to associate an integrable system to an algebraic equation. Well, some of it will be some well-known facts, but I want to rephrase in a language that is more adapted to what I'm studying. So the plan of my talk will be the following. I will start by an algebraic equation, and I will introduce the notion of its Newton's polygon, which is mostly a combinatorial object on which we can deduce many geometric properties of a Riemann surface associated to this algebraic polynomial. There is the notion of fundamental form. There are many geometric quantities associated to it. And from it, I will show how we find an isospectral lax pair. It's called the reconstruction method. It's not new. It's a method that goes back to Krichevel, Dubrovin, Matveyev, many people. And I will show you how to construct the wave function on isospectral pair. But the goal for me is really to do the H-bar deformation, where H-bar is a small parameter, which you could call the dispersion or something like that. The tool that I will use is mostly what I call topological recursion. And I will talk about other possible deformations and conclude. So let's start with an algebraic equation. So I will consider a polynomial P of xy of two variables, which I write sum of Pij xi yj, where the points ij are in z square, and the set of points that carry a coefficient Pij are called the Newton's polytop. It's a set of points in the ij plane. What I call the Newton's polygon is the convex envelope of this set. Now we shall give different names to the point according to where they are in the polygons. And the first kind are the points ij, such that after shifting by 1, 1, you are strictly inside, so strictly interior of the Newton's polygon. The second kind are those that are strictly exterior. And the third kind are those that are exactly falling on the boundary. So in this example, the blue points here, when you shift by 1, 1, they are interior. The red points, they fall on the boundary. On the green point fall on the boundary, and the red squares here are outside of the boundary after you shift by 1, 1. So they correspond to these three kinds of moduli. Let me illustrate all this with the elliptic curve, which, as John remarked, very often people put a factor 4 in front of the x cubed, but let me work with 1, which is more convenient for many other, which is another normalization more convenient for many applications. So it is made of this P of xy has polynomials that correspond to the 4 red points in the ij plane. And the new polygon is a triangle. It has exactly one interior point. And so there is exactly one first kind modulus, which is the point such that shifted by 1, 1, it is the interior point. And so it's the 0, 0. And here, if you look at the polynomial, is the coefficient G3. You have second moduli that are associated to the other polynomials, because every one of them, when you shift by 1, 1, in this one, when you shift by 1, 1, you fall outside. And there is no third kind moduli. In fact, you could also include in the second kind moduli the points that have a coefficient Pij equals 0. You could decide to include them or not. It doesn't matter. So another example which I can give you is KDV. So if you follow this following recipe, you will construct the KDV system at the end. So let's take an integer, a positive integer. Yeah.
Yes. Are the first kind, second kind, third kind exactly what you put in the numerator to get the first kind, second kind, third kind of meromorphic differential?
Yes, this is strongly related, and you will see that later. Why? So I give these names because they are related to the first, second, and third kind meromorphic differentials. So let me take, so for KDV, let's choose an integer, a positive integer on a certain number of times. And let's define a polynomial P of xy, which is y squared plus an odd degree polynomial of x of degree 2d plus 1, and whose coefficients for j larger than d are bilinear combination of the times. And the Newton's top looks like that, the Newton's polygon looks like that, and the number of interior points is equal to d. So the first kind moduli are the Pj0 with j between 0 and d minus 1, there are d of them. The third kind moduli, there is none. And the second kind, the Pj0 with g from d to d plus 1. And as I said, this second kind moduli are bilinear combinations of times. Okay. So all the P I'm going to give, you should recover KDV. So now there is to a polynomial equation, to such a polynomial, there is also associated a surface. In fact, an inverse surface. So first, let me define the locus of solution of the equation P of xy equals 0. It's a well, let me say for the moment, submanifold of C cross C. It's the subset of points in C cross C for which P of xy equals 0. Think that C cross C is R4, and this is a one complex equation. So in fact, it is two real equations. So it's this set is a codimension 2 locus in R4. So it's a surface. In fact, it's not really a manifold or surface because it is not. It may be not smooth. There is a procedure called desingularization, which replaces this sigma tilde by another thing, which is real Riemann surface sigma. And in fact, there is a map. This desingularization defines a map that sends sigma to sigma tilde. So this is a map from a certain Riemann surface sigma that sends a point of sigma to a pair x of p, y of p, which is solution of this equation. So it desingularizes because it may happen that there are several p's that correspond to the same point xy here, singular. Also, this is a two-dimensional surface in terms of real, so which means it's a one-dimensional complex, and it's called a complex curve. And if you look at the equation P of xy equals 0 for a given x, there are a certain number of solutions that we call branches, and there are as many solutions as the degree of p in the y variable. And they are the branches, and typically these points, these crossing points, are nodal points, and they are points where the surface is not smooth, but sigma is smooth. Sigma is somehow I mean, because for sigma, these two branches are really different. And this is why it's smooth. And there are also ramification points that play an important role. Let me also say something. Here, the surface sigma is immersed into C cross C, but it's more convenient to think of it as immersed into the total cotangent bundle of the X-plane. And so here, so far I was saying that for a given X in C, you have a Y in the fiber above it in C. But let's take the fiber to be not C, but the cotangent space, and instead of Y, we choose Y dx. So this is a point in the total cotangent bundle of CP1, and which has a projection to this, which is X, and the point in the fiber is Y dx, which is the restriction of the tautological form of the total cotangent bundle to the curve, and this is called field form. Let's continue. Let's illustrate all this with elliptic curve. Again, the Newton's polygon angle. And let me now introduce the notion of punctures. Well, first, the solution of that equation P of xy equals 0 is y equals square root of x, blah, blah. And you see that when x is large, this behaves like x to the power 3/2. What I want to show you is that you can read this 3/2 on the picture here, combinatorially. This 3/2 is a combinatorial quantity on this picture, and basically you see this triangle 3, 2. Well, let's take a local coordinate at infinity, and let's choose the local coordinate at infinity to be x to the power -1/2, which I will write x to the power 1 over alpha with alpha equals -2. And by definition, x is psi to the power -2, and you see here in this form that y behaves like at psi going to 0, it behaves like psi to the power -3. It has a triple pole. You could also do the full Taylor expansion of y by doing the Taylor expansion of the square root. Okay, so what I want to show you is that these two exponents, -2 and -3, they can be read on the Newton's polygon, from the normal vector to the boundary. So you see you have a boundary with of size 3, 2, and the normal vector pointing inwards is a vector of coordinates -2, -3, exactly the alpha and beta. -2 and the -3 are the coordinates of the normal vector to the boundary pointing inward. Also, the boundary is a line of equation 6 - 2i - 3j equals 0. Now, let me consider the following meromorphic one form. You take x to the, so choose i and j, compute x to the i-1, y to the j-1, derivative of this polynomial with respect to the y variable, so it's 2i, so this is the same thing, and multiply by dx so that it is a meromorphic form. It's a one form, and it's meromorphic, it could have both. And let's see how it behaves in the limit psi going to 0. So we express everything in terms of psi and compute the linear order, and you find that it is psi to the power 6 - 2i - 3j - 1. And which means that if you choose ij to be 1, 1, the interior point, so if you take the interior point, you find that this is psi to the power 0. So this is holomorphic. So this one form, when you choose the interior point, this one form is holomorphic. All what I showed you for the elliptic curve is quite general, and let me restate it in the general case. So you start from your bivariate polynomial. It has a certain Newton's polygon with several boundaries. And in fact, this counts as two boundaries. So each time there is an integer point, so here we say that there are two boundaries here in this part, not one. So and what I would call the punctures are the points at which either y or x diverges, it tends to infinity, and with some exponents, beta k and alpha k. And in fact, there is one puncture for each boundary, and alpha k is the order of x you can define a local coordinate which is psi k to the power. So if psi at infinity k, you take x minus x to the infinity k to the power 1 over alpha k. That's a good local coordinate that vanishes linearly at infinity k. And if x of infinity k is negative, it means that x has a pole, so the order is negative. And you take n to this power, and again, this is a local coordinate that vanishes linearly. Puncture. And it is on this coordinate, this local coordinate is canonical with respect to the projection by x to the base curve. And at this point, y behaves with a certain exponent minus beta k. And as I said, the exponents alpha k and beta k can be read for each puncture. So for each boundary, there are the coordinates of the normal vector to the boundary. Each boundary is a line of equation of some equation alpha k I plus beta k j equals mk. And if you look at the following one form, xi yj dx or p prime y of xy, you can verify that it behaves in the local variable. It behaves as a certain power of a local variable, and you recognize here alpha k I plus 1 plus you recognize the equation of the boundary. And so, therefore, if ij is a point of third kind, then shifted by 1, 1, it is exactly on the boundary. And for third kind points, you find a pole of degree 1. So you find a third kind meromorphic differential. This answers your question, John. If you start with second kind point, you find a second kind differential whose poles are of degree at least 2. And if ij is interior, is of first kind, then this has no pole. In fact, it has a 0 or constant. Again, this is something general. So all interior points are associated to first kind to differentials that have no poles, and these are called holomorphic differentials. Let me, okay, and this is a very famous theorem, and this is mostly why Newton's polygon was introduced, but there is a one-to-one correspondence between holomorphic one forms, so this one form that are holomorphic everywhere that have no poles, and interior points. And well, a conclusion from the previous slides is that this one form is a necessary condition for this one form to be holomorphic, so to have no pole, is that ij belongs to the interior. And in fact, this is not always a sufficient condition, but if p of xy is a generic polynomial, then it is also a sufficient condition. In this 1 hour talk, I will not do the non-generic case. So let's stay with the generic case to simplify, and let's assume that it is an if and only if. So basically, every interior point gives a holomorphic one form. And let me call these one forms the combinatorial one forms. They are just obtained from the combinatorics of the Newton's polygon. Now let's make a choice of cycles. First thing to say is that it is known that the dimension of a space of holomorphic one forms equals the genus of a curve. Which implies that the genus is equal to the number of interior points. So here, this one has genus, I don't know. Okay. But now let's make a choice of cycles. We shall choose cycles that are symplectic. So which means that on the surface of genus G, you can choose 2G independent non-contractible cycles. And such that they have symplectic crossings. So the A cycles don't cross each other, the B cycles don't cross each other, but each A cycle crosses exactly one B cycle. But this choice is not unique. You could choose this to be an A cycle and this to be the B, or the opposite. You could choose this to be the A and this to be the B. And there are many other possibilities. Now let's make this matrix. The first index K runs from 1 to G, it labels the A cycles. On the second index, ij, labels the interior points. And so this is a holomorphic one form, which we integrate on a cycle, on an A cycle. and this gives a number, and so this makes a square matrix of size the genus. A very famous theorem is that K is invertible, again in the general case. Now if you take your combinatorial one forms and multiply them by K inverse, you get some one forms again, some holomorphic one forms, and that are normalized on BA cycles. On this one, I would call them the normalized basis of one forms. And they depend on your choice of A and B cycles, which was not unique. Now you can define their integrals over the B cycles, and that's called the Riemann matrix of periods. Again, this is a square matrix, and what Riemann proved is that this matrix is symmetric, and its imaginary part is strictly positive definite. Such matrices are called Siegel matrices, and this goes back to Riemann. Now, let me introduce the Abel map. The Abel map is a map from the surface, so from a point of the surface to C to some power G. And the way you define it, you choose an origin and you integrate each omega I from your origin to P. That makes an AI of P. You put all of them together, that makes a vector of dimension G, and you call that the Abel map. In fact, it's not really defined on the surface. It's defined on the universal cover of the surface because it depends of how you go from P0 to. Let me ignore this for the moment. Another object that I want to define is the theta function, which is a map now from C to a G to C. I write it as a function of a vector in C to a G. In fact, it also depends on tau, and usually it's defined as a function of two variables, but let me emphasize only the role of the first variable, so vector in CG. It's a sum over n belonging to the lattice G, to the G dimension lattice ZG, with an exponential with a scalar product UN, and a quadratic term n, so somehow n squared with the quadratic form given by tau. Because imaginary part of tau is positive definite, this sum is always absolutely convergent, and it defines an analytic function of U. Another ingredient that will be useful is a half integer characteristic. So it's a half integer vector plus tau times a half integer vector, and this half integer vector can always be chosen such that this is a 0 of theta, but the gradient theta prime does not vanish at this point. It's always possible. It's not unique, but it's always possible to choose such a half integer characteristic. Now, you see here the Abel map goes from the surface to CG, and theta goes from CG to C. When you combine them together, you can typically make functions that go from sigma to C, and somehow the theta are the building blocks to define meromorphic functions on meromorphic forms on a Riemann surface. They play a very important role. However, as I said, they are defined only on the universal cover for the moment. Let me illustrate this on the elliptic curve again. As we said, the combinatorial meromorphic one form is dx over 2y. And if you make a choice of A and B cycle, you can integrate it on the A cycle that gives a number that you call K. And the normalized holomorphic one form, or it's our 1-by-1 matrix, is 1 over K times the combinatorial form. And this one is the normalized. And now you can integrate it on the B cycle, and that's our tau, whose imaginary part is strictly positive. The Abel map is you integrate from an origin, let's call it 0 to P, and the image of P is a point in CG, but here G equals 1, so it's a point in C, and you can verify that a fundamental domain of a torus is sent to a parallelogram by the Abel map. Parallelogram 0, 1, tau. The inverse map can be easily written, and it is given by Weierstrass functions. So you take a point here in this parallelogram and compute x by the Weierstrass function and y by 1/2 of p prime, derivative of Weierstrass function. It is known that the Weierstrass function satisfies P prime square equals the cubic polynomial of P, and this is exactly this equation. All right. So what is the fundamental form? Another very important geometric object is the fundamental form defined on the Riemann surface. And so you take, it will depend on 2 points. So you take a pair of points, P1 and P2. And remember that point in sigma tilde is a pair XY that satisfies the equation. Right, and I will define an object which is a 1 tensor 1 form, and I define it as follows. There is, again, it can be defined using only the Newton's polygon as follows. So B, you see it's a function of 2 points, so which means on P1, remember, is a pair x1, y1, on P2 is a pair x2, y2, that satisfies the equation. It is made of several pieces. Let me first look at the last piece, S over P prime, dx1, dx2, where S, it's written here, S is a combination of monomials of x1, y1 and x2, y2, and whose coefficients correspond only to first kind points, so points only inside, so only points of well, all Vij are speaking arrow. So this is a bilinear combination. After dividing by this denominator, it is a bilinear. So all this term is a bilinear combination of holomorphic forms. So this is holomorphic. This has no pole at all. All this term has no poles. Now this term, you see here you have a denominator x1 minus x2 to the square and y1 minus y2 to the square. It could look like it will have poles at P1 equals P2, and it could look like the pole will be of degree 4. But in fact, you see that the numerator also vanishes at these points, and you can check that now you can check that this is a pole of degree 2 at x1 equals x2, y1 equals y2. And the idea is to choose now the polynomial Q here in such a way that the only poles of this B are at coinciding points, so at P1 equals P2. So you want that the only pole is at P1 equals P2, and there is no other pole. And it is possible by choosing the following Q, which you can read on the Newton's polygon. So take all pairs of points ij, I prime, j prime, at which you have a coefficient. So Pij, Pi prime, j prime. So take all pairs of red points, this pair or this pair. Draw the triangle, so take this pair. Draw the triangle, T. And take now all points inside the triangle, including inside the boundary, inside or on the boundary of the triangle. And to each point inside the boundary, inside the triangle, associate a monomial with x1, y1, x2, y2 to some powers, and with this coefficient. This is how you define the Q. And this is a theorem that with this Q, defined in this combinatorial way, this quantity has a pole only at coinciding points on nowhere else. And it has exactly this behavior at coinciding points with a coefficient 1. Let me illustrate that on the elliptic curve. So I already somehow simplified a little bit the Q and the ratios of P's and all that. And this is what you get when you apply the previous formula. So again, there is this X that multiplies some holomorphic form. And here you can check that. So let's take the example. What happens when X1 equals X2 and Y1 equals Y2? You see that the numerator, so you see that you have 2 times X1 cube minus 2 times G2X minus 2 times G3. So which is exactly the same thing as 2 times Y squared plus 2 times Y squared. So that's a 4 times Y squared divided by 4 times Y squared. And you see that indeed this behaves like 1 over X1 minus X2 to the square times the X1 dx2. If you had taken the wrong point, so the point at which X1 equals X2, but at which Y1 equals minus Y2, these are also 2 points in the curve. And you can check that then the numerator vanishes. So there is no pole at such points. Okay. Now, if you choose some A on B cycles on the torus, it is always possible to choose the S here such that the A cycle of the B vanishes. A cycle integral of the B vanishes. It's always possible. And in fact, in the example of the elliptic curve, the value of S is the G2 Eisenstein series of tau. Is it where you notice the mistake, John? We can see that later. Well, you can also write the B in the Weierstrass as the Weierstrass function in the Z coordinates. It's just the Weierstrass function of the difference Z1 minus Z2 plus G2. And it can also be written with the theta function. So there are many ways to define this B. There is the combinatorial wave, the Weierstrass wave, theta Jacobi way. There are many ways, but they are all equal. On the fundamental form, as its name indicates, is a very fundamental geometric object. There is another one which is very useful, which is the prime form, which was, I think, introduced by Fay, as far as I know. And it is a spinor, -1/2 tensor -1/2 form. And it vanishes at coinciding points. So it's very useful. And it is, so saying that it's -1/2 -1/2, it's a 1/square root of dx1 dx2 times something that vanishes and with a coefficient 1 plus corrections. And it is anti-symmetric. And one way to compute it is to notice that when you differentiate it twice with respect to P1 and to P2, you get the B. So in other words, one way to find this E is to take the B, integrate it twice, and take the exponential, and this will give you the E. Otherwise, there is just an explicit formula with the theta function on using a half integer characteristic. So all these will be ingredients in my formulas. And another ingredient I need before talking about integrable systems, we need times. What are the times? So let me define the times as the coefficients in the Laurent-Taylor expansions at the punctures of y dx in the canonical coordinate. So the times that correspond to J non-zero are called second kind times. And they are the isomoduli times. When J equals 0, we call it third kind. And in fact, they are not isomodromic. They are in fact the monodromics usually. They are the residues. And another set of times that are interesting is take the acycle integral of y dx. I divide by 2 pi I for convenience, but and I have G such times, and these ones are called the periods, and they are also called first kind times. And they are often in relationship to monodromic times, to Hamiltonians. Let me just make the following remark. The set of second kind times is in one-to-one correspondence with a set of second kind moduli. So the independent moduli are as many as the independent times, and there are relationships. And remember in KDV, the Pij's were quadratic expressions in the T's. This is true also if you extend to a third kind moduli. So you can re-express all the third kind Pij's as combinations of all the second and third kind times. And here also the second kind Pij's are typically polynomial of the second kind T's. And they are
Bertrand, just a quick question. May I ask a quick question?
Yes, please.
So it goes by a little quickly. The Hamiltonians are in relation with what you're calling the monodromic times, in the sense that when you differentiate with respect to, I guess, the monodromic times, that gives you the Hamilton's equations with respect to those epsilons?
Well, okay. Maybe we should discuss that after in another place, but typically I borrowed this, well, okay. This denomination of Hamiltonians is, okay, it needs a very long explanation, so I don't want to do it now, but we can, okay, I should not have written it at all. Okay, we can discuss that later. But basically I borrowed it from Talon, Bablon, Bernard.
Who borrowed it from us?
Yes, who borrowed it from you. But I'm not totally sure we're talking about the same thing.
I think so.
Maybe I do a misuse of this name. Hamiltonians here. Okay.
No, it's very correctly, but you never introduced a lax matrix, so it's hard to say.
That's what I'm going to do now. It's to construct the lax matrix explicitly from this formalism. So first of all, let me see what happens when we deform the times. Remember, the times are defined by the coefficient of the Laurent-Taylor expansion at the punctures. And what happens when you deform the times? It deforms the differential y dx. And the deformation of the differential y dx is also a differential form, which is the linear combination of these delta t's and also the delta epsilons, and where the coefficients, the omega infinity kj's, are some forms. And these forms can be written explicitly in terms of a fundamental form in this way. And they have the property that they are meromorphic one forms with a pole at infinity k of degree j+1 and that are normalized on the cycles. So this is very explicit. So these coefficients of deformation are written as integrals of b, and they are really explicit. I mean, they can be computed again from the Newton's polygon. And the omega i's here, corresponding to the deformation of the first kind times, are the normalized holomorphic one forms. Well, you could think of it, so you could think of this as a cotangent vector in the space of moduli, in the moduli space. It's a kind of cotangent vector in the moduli space, but you can also think of it as really a small deformation, so just shifting the times by a very small t tildes. And let me just rewrite this in this form. So the y dx evaluated at t plus t tilde is the y dx evaluated at t plus a first order correction, which is the sum of t tilde times these omegas, plus second order or higher terms. And also let me put aside the holomorphic terms. What I just want to emphasize is that somehow whenever you will see such an expression, you can think of it as a small deformation of y dx. Also, let me make a remark. You would be tempted to write that the omega infinity kj's are the derivative of y dx to respect to the times t infinity kj's. This would be correct if all the times t infinity kj's would be independent, if they would really be a set of coordinates. But in fact, they are in general not independent. And they are not really coordinates. However, it is very helpful to think that somehow this would be true. This is very helpful for intuition to think of that, but it is slightly wrong. Okay, let me illustrate that on the elliptic curve again. So you have one first kind moduli, you have several second kind moduli, you have no third kind moduli. At infinity, so there is only one puncture, and at this puncture, y dx behaves like that. So you can read the times, -2 on G2 from it. So the only non-vanishing time is the time t infinity 5 on t infinity 1. All the other times are vanishing. And epsilon, which is the acycle integral, is our first kind time. Here it is legal to write that, so in fact, our space of, you see that our moduli space has two parameters, G2 and G3, so it's a two-dimensional space, and G2 and epsilon are good coordinates on it. Well, you could have used G2 and G3, but it's more convenient to choose G2 and epsilon as coordinates, and then this is correct. The d of y dx over dg2 is this one form with omega infinity 1, which you can write explicitly. It has a degree, it has a certain pole, and this one has no pole. So now I will indeed go to the lax matrix, and first I need to introduce the wave function. So I start by constructing the Baker-Axeter function. Usually, well, I will give a little bit unusual definition of the Baker-Axeter function. For me, the Baker-Axeter function will be a function of three things. One, so 2 points on the curve, P1 and P2, that are 2 points on the curve, on the meromorphic differential omega, whose acycle integrals are vanishing. And let me define it in this way. You have an exponential with an integral of ydx from P1 to P2, an exponential of omega from P1 to P2, an exponential that involves the Abel map on the periods, a theta function with the Abel map A of P2 minus A of P1, plus a certain vector zeta. And this vector zeta is defined in the following way. It's a vector of dimension G, and its entries are the B-cycle integrals of ydx plus omega minus the matrix tau applied to the A-cycle integrals of ydx. So for short, I will write it B minus tau A of ydx plus omega. And
this is the Sato formula.
Yes. Well, okay. Sato is when you relate it to the shifted partition function, no? To the shifted...
I mean, if the tau function is whatever.
Okay. Indeed, John. All these formulas are known. The only thing that is slightly unusual is that I use omega instead of times. But okay. But also I multiply by the prime form in the base. So the first theorem, which is indeed goes back to Sato, maybe Baker, Akizer, okay, many, okay. I had discussions with people who are not we don't totally agree about who invented it first. I think there is a debate on that, especially in Russia. But okay, it was done long ago, so the first, so one easy thing when you look at this formula is that when P1 equals P2, it tends to 1. Okay. The subtle thing is that it is well defined. Well, okay, I wrote a formula. In fact, this is not a void statement, but it is well defined because in fact here you see everything seems to depend on an integration path from P1 to P2. So it could depend, so in fact this could seem to be defined only on the universal cover. On the Abel map also depends on the choice of path, but it turns out that this precise combination of the thetas, the prime forms, the exponentials is in fact independent of which path you choose to go from P1 to P2. It is really defined on sigma cross sigma. Yes, and this is the Baker-Akizer function. Now, it's what is not so usual is that usually people write it as a function of times, and it's because I will choose an omega, which is function of times in the following way. So my omega must be a linear combination of forms that have vanishing acycles, and I will choose this omega infinity kj's. And I choose a linear combination with some tildes, and the times now are the tildes. And you can think that somehow ydx plus omega of t tilde is like a small deformation of ydx that corresponds to having shifted the times by the t tildes. And but here somehow we shift, but we keep only the order one in the expansion in powers of t tilde. So somehow we decompose the times into the fast part on the slow part, and somehow we keep only order one in the slow part. And in fact, instead of writing psi as a function of omega, very often people prefer to write it as a function of the times, but this is just equivalent. I prefer to write it as a function of a one form. Also, another thing is that very often in the literature, you hear that integrable systems can be brought to linear motion at constant velocity if you use the good coordinates. And very often, these good coordinates is zeta, a point in the Jacobian, which moves. So since it is an integral of omega, it moves at constant velocity, and the velocity is basically the b cycles of omega infinity kj. So we can read the velocity here. Okay. Now, how do you, once you have defined the wave function, so which I recall here, how do you define the Lax matrix? So first I will define a matrix, and the matrix is just you take the wave function, psi, and you put as points here the pre-images of 2 points. So take x1 and x2 on CP1, so complex number, and take their pre-images by x, so all the points xi, y, so x, y, where for a given x, you take all the solution of p of xy equals 0. And that gives the set of points.
Sorry, Bertrand, could I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Concerning the, hi, by the way, concerning the references. So this formula in terms of Zegge-Kernel on different sheets, it was in my paper in 2004, right? Which was in the archive. It's not Krichiver.
Okay, they say it was in 76, but okay. Well,
not in presence
I agree with you. I agree with you. There is some debate on who invented this formula, but okay, and we can discuss that later. But I'm not claiming to have invented it.
But so single term province. That's
I can hardly hear you. In fact, the sound is really bad, and I hear only one word out of three.
Anyway, I just think that this kind of formula was in my paper essentially.
I'm sure.
Right?
I'm sure it was in your papers, but yeah. Well, okay. But I think it was also in the paper of Krichiver in 76 or something.
No, not in terms of Zegge-Kernel. It was Krichiver's construction is different story, completely different. First of all, it was scalar, right, and so on. Well, you know the history, so.
I mean, or Bertrand, Krichiver was
I'm
not concerned.
I'm not claiming anything about pre-existence.
Yeah, Krichiver and company were talking not about isomonodromic systems. They were talking about isospectral.
So far I'm talking.
Just this matrix psi, which Bertrand is writing in exactly that form, when you put everything into constant, like you C plus zeta, right? So that was in the solution of Riemann-Hilbert. Then you introduce additional deformation times, and you get that. But it's,
well, okay. In fact, in 99, I wrote it, but only in the context of matrix models too. Okay. Well, can I continue?
Yeah, sure. No, I just.
I totally agree that there is. Well, okay. I mean, who has invented it first is not so okay. I mean, I would like to know for sure. But okay, let me now.
Very easy to. Anyway, just sorry for interrupting.
What I just wanted to say is that this is not new. This is old stuff. All this old. Okay, we can discuss how. But okay, but so you define a matrix by taking the preimages. And an important theorem is that this matrix has a duality property. So in fact, which shows that it is invertible. So we know explicitly what is the inverse of that matrix, and it's obtained just by exchanging the role of x2 and x1. Now let me define this following matrix. L. It depends on 2 points like x1 and x2 that I recall x tilde and x. And it depends on our omega, that may depend on time. But so I take the matrix psi, and I write them differently because they would play different roles, x tilde and x. So I take psi of x tilde x, multiply it by the diagonal matrix whose entries are precisely these yi's of x, not x tilde, and multiply by the inverse matrix. So this matrix L is a conjugate of this diagonal matrix. So almost by definition, it's a characteristic polynomial. So its eigenvalues are there. They are the solutions of the equation P of xy equals 0. So its characteristic polynomial is our P of xy, the one we started with. And in particular, this is independent of times t tildes. Which is why it's called isospectral. And moreover, and I'm not going to detail it here, there is a connection in the module space of time, a connection, a flat connection, which is rational in X and which annihilates L. And the important point is really the rational in X. And well, okay. And so basically it shows that to any polynomial P of xy, there is a way to construct a Lax matrix associated with that corresponds associated to this P of xy that satisfies an isospectral system. So first remark, in fact, this X tilde here for me is arbitrary, and the role it plays, it plays somehow a role of choice of gauge, because changing the X tilde by another X tilde prime is just conjugated L by some matrix that is independent of X. So it's just a gauge transformation. And in the literature, in fact, most of the time people prefer to choose X tilde to be at infinity. So they like to choose the gauge at infinity, but it's not necessary for this construction. Now, my goal is to talk about the isomonodromic deformation. So you start from a P of xy. And so far, basically, our Lax matrix was such that it satisfies an eigenvalue equation. And by definition, somehow, its characteristic polynomial was our P of xy. Now, what we want to do is to do a small H-bar deformation, where H-bar is a small parameter that we can think of being somehow dispersion. And we want to replace the eigenvalue equation by a differential equation. So in the right-hand side, instead of psi y, we'll have H-bar ddx psi. You can see that in the H-bar going to 0 limit, to solve such an equation, you can use the WKB approximation, and in the framework of, which means that psi is approximately equal to exponential H-bar 1 over H-bar times the primitive of y dx, and which means that when you compute what is L in this limit, you recover that in the H-bar going to 0 limit, the L satisfying this equation is conjugate to y, and so its characteristic polynomial in the H-bar going to 0 limit is our P again. Also, another way to see this is, instead of thinking of differential equation, it is more appropriate to think of it as a connection. So multiply everything by dx and put the right-hand side in the left. And this can be written d minus H-bar inverse L dx psi equals 0, and you should think of it as a connection. Now it's a connection, pay attention to the way it's a connection on the surface, not a connection on the moduli space. Okay, so this is what we are going to construct now, and one tool that I will use to construct it is topological recursion. The starting point for topological recursion is to have a spectral curve, which is the data of a surface, sigma, a ramified cover, x, a function s, function from sigma to a base curve CP1, a one form, y dx, and the b, the fundamental form, with a certain choice of normalization of certain cycles. Here we have such, here our PXY gives us a spectral curve, as I showed in the previous slide. So it gives the surface sigma, it gives the x, it gives the y dx, it gives the b. And in fact, we even have a family of such spectral curves that are locally parameterized by our times. It's local coordinates because, for example, the periods that depend on the choice of A cycles cannot be defined globally. So now let me give the definitions. A definition is that to every spectral curve, there is a way to associate a family of differential forms, which we defined with Orentin in 2007, and which I will denote omega GNs. And the first few of them are omega 01 is y dx, omega 02 is b, and the others can be defined by a certain recursion. Please don't look at the recursion. The only thing to retain from this is that there is a formula to compute them, which is recursive, whence the name recursion, topological recursion. And also another thing to retain is that the omega g zeros, they are called FGs. And instead of being n forms, they are scalars. So zero form is a scalar if you want. So now with this, I'm going to build the wave function. So let's take 2 points PQ on the surface, and let's choose gamma, a Jordan arc that runs from Q to P. So far I was always integrating from Q to P, but let me make it explicit. And let me define psi. It's a function of these 2 points Q and P. It's a function of our spectral curve, and it's a function of the parameter H bar. It contains this prime form. It has a denominator that is independent of Q and P, and the numerator, and then an exponential sum over G and N, some powers of H bar. And remember that omega Gn defined by topological recursion is an N, is a tensor product of N forms, and so it can be integrated on a product of N times the gamma. So the result is a number which is a function of Q and P on the universal cover. And the denominator, Z, is this sum of H bar to the 2G minus 2 and the FGs that are scalars of S. All this is defined as formal series in H bar. Nothing guarantees that these sums over powers of H bar will be convergent, and in fact, in practice, they are not convergent. You need to do something like Borel resummation to really get a function of H bar. But let's define everything at the formal level. Now, observe one thing, the prefactor. So if you take the term in H bar to the power -1, you get the integral of y dx. The terms with H bar to the power 0 gives the 1 over E. And then all the rest is 1 plus H bar corrections. So to linear order, it looks very much like our Becker-Akizov function, but except that the thetas are missing. So in fact, it looks very much like the Becker-Akizov function in the case of a genus zero curve. But otherwise, the theta terms are missing. So there is no way that this is going to be a well-defined function of Q and P. It is defined only on the universal cover unless we put the theta terms. So let me show you how to put the theta terms. So far I was defining theta as a sum over the lattice Z to the power G, but now let me take an arbitrary lattice. So I define a theta function to be the sum over an arbitrary lattice, and we need to have a kind of scalar product with U on the quadratic form. And the kth derivative of theta is the same formula, but we take n tensor n k times in the sum. Here, the lattice that I will choose is the lattice generated by B cycles, the span of the B cycles, integer linear combinations of B cycles. And the quadratic form is given by the double integral of the B, and the linear pairing with U is just the integral, so U will be a one form, but zeta is the same as before. And this allows me to define the wave function psi. So the wave function psi is defined by this formula. In fact, there is in my papers, there is a comprehensive formula with all the terms, I mean, all powers of H bar, but let me here write just the first few. There is a denominator, so psi has a denominator, which is Z. And the Z starts with an exponential. Then there is the theta. So if you would keep this would be the tau function for the isospectral system. But then we have H bar corrections. And here, remember that omega 1,1 is a one form. So it can be paired with theta prime, which is a one cycle. And omega 0,3 is a one tensor one form. It can be paired with theta third, which is a n tensor n here. So which is a cycle tensor cycle. So it can be paired. And all terms are like that. The psi is more or less the same thing, and it contains H bar corrections that look like integrals of omega 1,1, triple is integrals of omega 1,3, pairing with the thetas and so on. And all together, this is now well-defined function of Q and P. It's no more dependent on the universal cover. So let me say it. It is defined, it is well defined on sigma cross sigma ordered by ordering powers of H bar. And it tends to 1 at coinciding points. And again, we define the square matrix by taking the preimages of x1 and x2. It's a square matrix. And now let me define the lax matrix by just taking the derivative of psi and multiply it by psi inverse. So now I write it as a conjecture because it's not proved in full generality, but it's proved in many cases. But well, basically what the claim is that this will be our isomonodromic lax matrix, and it satisfies this equation. Well, the fact that it satisfies this equation is trivial because I define it this way. So I define it such that it satisfies the equation. The fact that its h bar going to zero limit is the isospectral one is also really trivial because you just, in the definition, you just replace the 1 plus h bar by 1. And you recover the Baker axial function, and so it's kind of trivial. What is really non-trivial is that it is rational in X. This is the non-trivial fact. But to every order in h bar, this is rational in X, and the degree of this rational function is not growing with the order in h bar. And this is really the non-trivial fact. This has been proved for some large classes of P of xy. This has not been proved in full generative, so that's why I call it conjecture, and it's often referred to as the quantum curve conjecture. We believe it's true in full generative, but for the moment, some cases are still missing. Well, I'm going to the end of my talk according to the time. Let me skip. So let me say some few words about quantum versions. Well, one way to do quantum version is to replace differential equation by difference. Sorry, I just see that we time to stop. So let me jump to my conclusion. Well, let me just in 2 words that there are other deformations using the Nekrasov parameters, and we'll see if there are questions about that. But okay. My conclusion is that we started with a polynomial on its Newton polygon. There is a way to build an isospectral integrable system, which I call the reconstruction method, which is not my work. And another thing is using topological recursion, we could build an isomonodromic integrable systems, which is equivalent to building a connection on a principal bundle. It is associated to names like the Dora moduli space, Hitchin spaces, Hitchin systems, and non-Abelian Hodge correspondence, and all that. These are just names that I'm throwing, but it's just to say that this can be put in a very general framework. It can be, there are deformations that go from differential equations to difference equations, and this has applications to NOS, to Gromov-Witten invariance of Calabi-Yau. There are also non-commutative deformations that relate to Baxter equation, Bethe-Ansatz, and all that, that we are working on at the moment. Another further prospect is that, in fact, we could choose the coefficients of P, not in C, but in some field. And in fact, most of the methods I talked about would work with many fields. Also, the non-commutative version corresponding to Baxter equation is something that is not finished, and we are still working on it. And also the link with conformal field theories. And I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bertrand. Are there any questions?
Bertrand, could I ask 2 things? The first thing is, when you do this ansatz in terms of topological recursion, so usually if you do WKB expansion, you fix the form of differential equation, and then you deduce the explicit form of the coefficients of the expansion of the wave function, right? Or, well, you can, so then you know the equation explicitly, and the expansion you also kind of know. Here it seems that you know the expansion, but you don't know the equation. You can just prove the existence of these rational guys, but the dependence on H bar, there is the whole tail also, which is a little bit non-controllable. So it would be in the ideal world, we want to control both sides, right? Explicitly the equation and explicitly the WKB. Somehow, is there any chance to get this the lax metrics in all orders, not just in the highest order?
Well, the fact is that we know all this formalism which I presented, we know that it applies to something like the matrix models. And in matrix models, this matrix psi is made of orthogonal polynomials on their Hilbert transforms. And it is known that in matrix models, the L has the full H-bar expansion, including some non-perturbative terms like theta's. And it is known that you cannot avoid this. There is a full expansion.
Okay, so then if I can ask the second question. So then we start from this, from the curve, we take the Segi kernel, we take the whole expansion, and we get some solution of Riemann-Hilbert, right? So then that solution of Riemann-Hilbert, which I refer to, which I have written like in 2020 years ago, is some special case with quasi-permutation monodromies, which gives you the special Lax matrix, of course, automatically. Now, is it clear? And that is also written in terms of theta functions. So is there any way to control when you land into that special explicitly solvable class, starting from this, from the topological recursion? Do you know how to adjust the parameters of your initial construction, right? Such that you do the H-bar expansion and you land at certain special point where the Riemann-Hilbert problem is also explicitly solvable.
Sorry, maybe I missed what you call explicitly solvable.
Well, that paper which you know, right? Yeah. You get the Riemann-Hilbert and you get the isomonodromic solution of isomonodromic deformations explicitly in terms of Zegi kernels.
Yeah.
Right? But this is already the sum, right?
Yes, I see. So no, it's not fully clear at the moment.
It should be not very hard to see what kind of parameters you should start from to land somewhere where you know the answers.
In fact, I have some guesses for that, but at the moment it's not proved, I think.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
So, other questions? Does anyone have another question?
Yes, I had another question. In the Q difference case, there's already these constructions either by Goncharov-Kenyon or Fock-Marshakov, where you start from a Newton polygon and then you construct that cluster integrable system.
Yes, what they call, for example, the Daimer models, things like that.
What?
For example, the Daimer model.
Yes, exactly. So in that case, then when you deautonomize, you really land on Q-Pan-Levé equations, essentially. So I was wondering if it's clear the relation between that approach and this one, because it seems pretty much the same thing.
Yes, I believe it cannot be different, but this needs to be investigated to understand that. And in fact, I already started discussing with some people about that. But for the moment, no, there is no proof of that. Okay, I cannot imagine it would be different.
Yeah.
But it's two different constructions, but they must lead to the same thing. I cannot imagine it's something really different.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? If there's no other question, I think I might ask a question. In passing, you mentioned Hamiltonians, but then you didn't say anything more about it. So could I just ask you, when you start with this kind of algebraic spectral curve, and you reconstruct, I'm only talking about H-bar 0, you reconstruct the Lax matrix, that is necessarily a rational matrix in the X variable?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, if you take this Lax matrix, it's got spectral invariants, the coefficients of the spectral curves.
Yeah.
And amongst those spectral, and it's very well known that for whatever rational Lax matrix there is, that these are, with respect to a natural Poisson structure. These are, in a sense, provide a complete set of commuting invariants. And so it's generically all integrable systems and has a nice history and a nice explanation. But they're also, and it's very important, that they're Casimirs. So some of the coefficients are dynamic, they generate flow, and the others are just in the center of the algebra, and they don't generate any isospectral flow. However, exactly these Casimirs are, in the Hamiltonian approach to isomonodromic systems, these are exactly the isomonodromic deformation parameters of Birkhoff. Are these, you know what I'm referring to? So I'm talking about the general rational isomonodromic system in which the independent parameters are the Birkhoff parameters, which tell you what the asymptotic form is. And if you do it in a Hamiltonian setting, there's a very beautiful way to interpret these Casimirs as residues of the fundamental differential with various moments. So it's you expand, you make a Laurent expansion around the poles, and only those generate isomonodromic. Nothing else. It's exactly the whole shebang.
Yes.
Are they the same thing as what you were talking about?
I think so. Yes.
And the Hamiltonians. So there's also a beautiful fact that the Casimirs can be thought of as the coefficients of the polar part of the fundamental differential near to a pole, and the corresponding Hamiltonians that generate those isomonic are in the analytic part. They're the sort of mirror image in the analytic part. Does that follow from your residue formula?
I think it's really this, but basically this is what I presented, but in my own words. But yes.
Okay, so everything. Okay, this is, we shouldn't, I mean, you didn't talk about the Hamiltonian aspects, but this is what we're doing with Marco and with Jacques Hurtubise. We're trying to get this whole Hamiltonian structure of the isomonodromic equations clear in terms of spectral invariance. But we don't have any there's no place with an H bar. The H bar doesn't enter. So that's interesting. Okay, that was my question. Are there any other questions before we call it a day? No?
Well,
Harry Braden, don't you have a question? Are you there? Oh, maybe we lost.
Okay, just I will, Dima, maybe, so if you will help me get correct citations for everything, I would appreciate.
Oh, sure, I can try. I can just make a little search, and yeah, there are some sources which are appropriate in quoting that, including an old lecture notes of Knizhnik. So I can send you that.
Yeah.
If I could just, yeah.
Many pieces were invented by several people at similar times and then put together in a different way by other people, and in particular you, as you said, putting it as a matrix. Okay, but it's hard to really put the starting point.
Yeah. If I could just step in as a bit of a sort of arbitre or referee, certainly the Krzyzewski-Novikov-Dubrovin formula long preceded Dima's formula, but it did not refer to isomonodromic. It referred only to the KP type tau functions. There was nothing about isomonodromic.
They didn't use a Szeged kernel. The realization of the fact
I know.
The kernel is kind of very appropriate in this context.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say, that Bertrand has sort of unified things. He's brought in these first type, second type, third type differentials, and he's somehow given one formula which works simultaneously for isospectral and for isomonodromic. And you focused on the isomonodromic deformations. Krzyzewski and company focused on what I would call the isospectral deformations. And this one big formula of Bertrand's resumes all of these simultaneously. Is that right, Bertrand?
Maybe you can say that.
well, there are different types of deformations.
Well, I would say the wave function looks identical, just the deformation parameters are different. That's it.
Yes.
And then, of course, Bertrand generalized it to the wave function for an arbitrary isomonodromic deformation using TR, right? But that's a new, of course, a new development.
I'm only talking about the formula for the Baker-Kaiser function. The way that Bertrand wrote it in his abstract way rather than the concrete way that Krichover and company did.
Well,
allowed all of this algebrogeometric data about the spectral curve. And so this data, including second type differentials and moments and so on. So it's more general. But I believe that the isomonodromic piece of it was in your formula. I mean, you know better than I do, but it seems to me that that's what's going on, that this is somehow Bertrand is getting a sort of unified picture in which there are many other deformation parameters besides the abelian ones that were treated by Krichover and company.
Well, as long as topological recursion is concerned, that's for sure.
No, I'm not talking about, that's just solution method. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the formula, what I called maybe incorrectly the Sato. It's not the Sato formula. It's only the Sato formula when you're talking about things like K-peta functions and so on. It's more general.
Well, more or less, it's
I'm not sure this is more general than the formula that Dima is talking about, but I mean, the isospectral case.
But Dima, does your formula include all possible K-peta functions? Or at least the algebrogeometric ones?
You see, John, we have discussed that a few times, right? That if you were using that formula which I have written in terms of Zege kernel, then there are constants. If you treat them as constants and deform the base curve, then this is isomonodromic context. If you say that these constants now are times by themselves, you land in the isospectral context.
In fact, let me say things in another way. What I define, and you also, Dima, is something somehow which is defined pointwise in the moduli space. And then you can decide in which family you want to study them. And depending on the family, you could call these different kind of integrable systems, depending on, as just exactly what you said, what you want to vary and what you keep constant. But the fact is that to compute these, you don't need to, I mean, I define them not by solving a kind of differential system or deformation equation. I define them by in a pointwise way. So I just give myself a value of all the times and I compute the psi.
Okay, this discussion could continue, but there are people perhaps who don't want to participate. So I'd like to finish by thanking Bertrand for a very uplifting and inspiring talk. Thank you very much. And whoever wants to stay logged in and